Welcome, everyone. Today we dive into a fascinating philosophical discussion, a topic that bridges ancient wisdom with modern psychological insights. Imagine a conversation between Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, and the Buddha, the awakened sage. What would they say about the nature of the self, and how would they debate its true essence? In this video, we're going to explore the concept of the self versus no self, two perspectives that have shaped human thought and spirituality for centuries. The self, as Jung sees it, is the deep, often unconscious part of us, the integrated whole that comprises both light and shadow. Meanwhile, the Buddha's concept of no self, or Anatta, suggests that our sense of an individual self is an illusion, a transient, ever-changing collection of experiences rather than a fixed, unchanging entity. The debate between Jung and the Buddha would undoubtedly be compelling, for while Jung emphasizes the importance of integrating the self, the Buddha challenges the very notion of a permanent, individual self. So, what can we learn from their perspectives? How do they shape our understanding of identity, personal growth, and the path to enlightenment? Let's unravel this profound topic and explore how both Jungian psychology and Buddhist philosophy can help us transform our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. The discussion between Carl Jung and the Buddha regarding the nature of the self raises an important existential question that has echoed through philosophy, psychology, and spirituality for millennia. At the heart of this debate lies the concept of the self. Is there a permanent, unchanging self, or is the self a mere illusion? Carl Jung, one of the most influential figures in psychology, proposed the idea of the self as the integration of all aspects of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. To Jung, the self represented the culmination of psychological development, the point where we achieve wholeness by reconciling the various parts of our personality, including our shadow, persona, and archetypal forces. This holistic view of the self is central to Jungian therapy, which aims to help individuals integrate their unconscious mind with their conscious awareness. On the other hand, the Buddha teaches that the notion of a permanent, independent self is a delusion, something that leads to suffering and attachment. According to Buddhist philosophy, the concept of anatta, or no self, asserts that there is no fixed, eternal essence within us. Rather, what we perceive as the self is a collection of impermanent elements, thoughts, sensations, emotions, and actions. These elements are constantly in flux, and the illusion of a permanent self arises when we identify too strongly with these transient experiences. This profound divergence between Jung's idea of the self as a cohesive whole and the Buddha's teaching of no self forms the foundation of the great debate. Let's explore both perspectives in detail and see what they reveal about the nature of human identity, suffering, and transformation. Carl Jung's concept of the self. Jung's view of the self is rooted in the idea that wholeness and integration are fundamental to human psychological development. In his work, Jung emphasized the importance of achieving self-realization, a process through which an individual brings together the conscious and unconscious elements of the psyche. For Jung, the self is not simply a concept of the ego or personal identity. It is a deeper, more profound aspect of the psyche that transcends the individual personality. The self in Jungian psychology is a unifying force that seeks balance between opposing forces, such as the conscious and unconscious, the light and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine. Jung referred to these opposites as the polarities of the psyche. When an individual acknowledges and integrates their shadow, the hidden, suppressed aspects of the personality, they come closer to experiencing the self in its full, integrated form. This process, known as individuation, involves integrating all aspects of the psyche, including those that are usually rejected or hidden. Jung believed that true self-realization comes when a person is able to embrace their wholeness, accepting both the light and dark aspects of their being. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to understand and integrate it into the conscious mind. In this sense, Jung's view of the self is dynamic, ever-evolving, and integral to psychological health and wholeness. The Buddha's concept of no-self, Anatta, in stark contrast to Jung's belief in the integration of the self, the Buddha taught that the idea of a permanent, unchanging self is an illusion that leads to suffering. According to Buddhist teachings, all things, including the self, are impermanent, anicca, and constantly changing. The Buddha taught that when we cling to the idea of a fixed self, we create unnecessary attachment and suffering. The concept of anatta, or no-self, is central to Buddhism. It asserts that there is no permanent, independent self or soul that exists apart from the body and mind. Rather, what we call the self is simply a collection of 5 aggregates, skandhas: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These aggregates are constantly changing and interdependent, and none of them represent a permanent, fixed self. The belief in a permanent self leads to attachment, desire, and suffering. The Buddha taught that liberation, nirvana, comes not from the realization of a permanent self, but from the letting go of the attachment to self. When we relinquish the need to cling to an unchanging identity and accept the impermanence of all things, we can experience true freedom from suffering. This non-attachment is what enables spiritual growth and enlightenment, the intersection of Jungian psychology and Buddhist philosophy. At first glance, Jung's view of the self and the Buddha's teaching of no-self may seem to be completely at odds. However, if we look deeper, we can find surprising parallels between the two perspectives. Both Jung and the Buddha emphasize the importance of self-awareness and self-exploration. While Jung encourages individuals to explore and integrate the unconscious parts of their psyche in order to achieve wholeness, the Buddha teaches that self-awareness is essential for realizing the truth of impermanence and no-self. In both cases, the goal is to transcend ego-based attachments and reach a higher state of awareness. Jung's idea of the self could be seen as a step towards spiritual awakening, as it involves integrating the various elements of the psyche and transcending the limited ego. However, Jung did not deny the existence of the unconscious and the eternal aspects of the self, which may be closer to the non-attachment of Buddhism. In other words, while Jung emphasized the integration of the self, he also acknowledged the importance of stepping beyond the ego, which is similar to the Buddha's idea of transcending the illusion of the permanent self. On the other hand, the Buddha's concept of no-self could be viewed as a more radical form of individuation. Instead of seeing the self as an integrated whole, Buddhism teaches that the self is empty, a fluid, ever-changing process that cannot be grasped. This acceptance of the emptiness of self leads to the release of attachment and the realization of true freedom. Practical implications of the self versus no-self debate. Understanding the debate between the self and no-self can have profound implications for personal growth and transformation. Let's look at how these two views influence our approach to life, identity, and suffering. Embracing the self, Jungian perspective. Jung's emphasis on self-realization and individuation can help us achieve psychological wholeness. When we accept all parts of ourselves, including our flaws and shadows, we can begin to live more authentically and with greater self-awareness. This process allows us to make peace with the complexities of our identity and experience a sense of integration and inner balance. However, Jung's approach can also have a shadow side, the danger of becoming too attached to the idea of a permanent, unchanging self. This attachment can lead to ego inflation and a resistance to change. Therefore, it's important to remain open to the fluidity of life and be willing to evolve as we continue our journey of self-discovery. Letting go of the self, Buddhist perspective. The Buddha's teachings on no-self encourage us to recognize that our identity is not fixed and that attachment to a static sense of self is the root of much of our suffering. By practicing mindfulness and non-attachment, we can let go of the need to cling to our ego-driven desires and expectations. This can lead to a sense of freedom and peace as we learn to live in harmony with the impermanence of life. Letting go of the self does not mean losing our identity, but rather understanding that our identity is fluid and interdependent. It invites us to live more fully in the present moment without being burdened by the weight of past identities or future expectations. The debate between Jung's concept of the self and the Buddha's teaching of no-self provides profound insights into the nature of human existence and spiritual growth. While Jung's focus on integration and wholeness offers a path to personal fulfillment, the Buddha's teachings encourage us to transcend attachment to the ego and embrace the fluidity of life. Ultimately, both perspectives offer valuable wisdom for transforming our lives. By integrating the best of both worlds, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Whether through embracing the process of individuation or practicing mindfulness and non-attachment, we can move toward greater self-awareness, inner peace, and spiritual freedom. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. We hope this exploration of Jung and the Buddha's greatest debate has inspired you to reflect on your own understanding of the self and its place in the world. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful discussions on psychology, philosophy, and spiritual wisdom.